when Geneva Ashford, the ice princess of Manhattan's elite society, flees a charity gala on a rainy night. She never expected to find refuge in a small Brooklyn cafe. What begins as a chance encounter with cafe owner Micah becomes a forbidden love that threatens to destroy everything her powerful family has built. As the Ashford empire wages war against their relationship, Geneva must choose between the gilded cage of her inheritance and the uncertain freedom of following her heart. This is a tale of breaking chains, defying expectations, and discovering that sometimes the greatest wealth is found in the simplest moments of genuine connection. Before we start this story, comment below from where you're watching us. The chandeliers sparkled like diamonds in the grand ballroom of the Brooklyn Museum. Waiters in crisp black uniforms circulated with trays of champagne, while New York's elite mingled, dressed in their finest. This was the Ashford Foundation's annual charity gala, and, as always, all eyes were on Geneva Ashford. Geneva stood near the bar, a vision in her white designer gown. At 25, she was the sole heiress to the Ashford International Empire, a company worth billions with luxury properties around the world. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight chignon, not a strand out of place. Her makeup was flawless, her posture perfect. Everything about her screamed wealth and privilege. "There you are," said Bradford Wells, her fiancé, as he approached with 2 glasses of champagne. "Your father's looking for you. The mayor just arrived." Geneva took the glass without smiling. Bradford was handsome in his tailored tuxedo, with his slick-back brown hair and perfect teeth. On paper, he was the ideal match. Harvard Business School graduate from an old money family, and working as CFO at Ashford International. Their wedding, scheduled for next spring, was already being called the social event of the decade. "I need a minute," Geneva said, her voice cool and controlled like always. The society pages called her the Ice Princess of Manhattan, and she played the part well. "I've been smiling for photos for an hour straight." Bradford frowned. "This isn't the time to disappear, Geneva. Your father." "My father can wait 5 minutes," she snapped, then immediately composed herself. Public displays of emotion weren't the Ashford way. Bradford leaned in closer, his voice low but sharp. "You've been distant all week. People are starting to notice. Remember, perception is reality in our world. Is that all you care about? What people think?" Geneva asked. "Don't be naive. Image is everything in our position," Bradford hissed. "You're an Ashford. Start acting like one." Geneva felt something crack inside her. 25 years of perfect behavior, of doing exactly what was expected, of being the Ashford heiress instead of just being Geneva. "Maybe I'm tired of acting," she said. Bradford grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in just enough to hurt without leaving marks. He was good at that. "We'll discuss this later. Right now, you have guests to attend to." Geneva pulled away. "Let go of me. Your father invested too much in this relationship for you to throw one of your tantrums now," Bradford said, his voice still quiet but his eyes cold. "Remember, without the Ashford name, you're nothing." That was the moment something snapped. Years of suppressed feelings bubbled to the surface. "I need some air," Geneva said, placing her champagne glass on a nearby table with deliberate care. "Don't you dare walk away from me," Bradford warned. But Geneva was already moving toward the exit, her white gown flowing behind her like a sail caught in the wind. She could feel the eyes on her back, could almost hear the whispers starting. The Ice Princess was melting down. Outside, the cool night air hit her face. Her driver wasn't expecting her for hours. Her security team was inside. Her tiny clutch purse had only her lipstick and a credit card. No phone. Perfect. For once in her life, Geneva Ashford wanted to disappear. She slipped off her painful heels, carrying them in one hand as she walked away from the museum, away from the gala, away from the life that was suffocating her. She walked for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 40 minutes. The elegant streets of the museum district gave way to more residential areas. Then the buildings became older, the streets less well-lit. Still, she kept walking, her mind racing with thoughts she'd never allowed herself to have before. Did she even love Bradford? Or was he just another acquisition, another merger, another business deal orchestrated by her father? Did she even want to run Ashford International someday? She was so lost in thought that she didn't realize she was actually lost until the skies opened up and rain began to fall. Heavy drops splashed on her designer gown, ruining the silk. Her perfectly styled hair began to droop. One of her heels broke when she tried to put them back on. That's when panic set in. She didn't know where she was. She had no phone, no driver, no security. The streets were empty except for a few hurrying figures seeking shelter from the rain. Geneva ducked under the awning of what looked like a small cafe. The sign read King's Corner. A warm light glowed from inside. She peered through the window, seeing a few people seated at small tables. It looked safe enough. She hesitated, then pushed open the door. A bell tinkled overhead. Inside was warm and smelled like coffee and cinnamon. A few customers looked up briefly, then returned to their conversations or books. No one seemed to recognize her, which was a strange but welcome sensation. "We're closing in 20, a deep voice said from behind the counter. "But you look like you need a safe place to sit." Geneva turned to see a man about 30, with rich brown skin and eyes so dark and deep they seemed to see right through her carefully constructed walls. He wore a simple black t-shirt, and his arm showed the definition of someone who worked with his hands. He had a quiet steadiness that immediately made her feel less panicked. I'm lost," Geneva admitted, something she'd never said out loud before. The man nodded, not showing any surprise at the bedraggled woman in a now-ruined designer gown standing in his cafe. "I'm Micah," he said simply. "Micah King. This is my place. Have a seat, and I'll bring you some tea." "Tea," Geneva repeated, and used to people deciding things for her. Micah gave a small smile that transformed his serious face. "You look like you could use something warm. Unless you prefer coffee." "No, tea would be nice," Geneva said, feeling strangely off balance. She sat at a small table in the corner. A few minutes later, Micah brought over a steaming mug. "Chamomile," he said. "Good for stress." "How do you know I'm stressed?" Geneva asked. Micah raised an eyebrow. "Just a guess." He started to turn away, but Geneva surprised herself by saying, "I'm Geneva." "Nice to meet you, Geneva," Micah said, not asking for her last name, which was refreshing. Everyone in her world knew her as Geneva Ashford, the heiress, the Ice Princess. "You're not from around here, are you?" Geneva gave a small laugh. "Is it that obvious?" "Well, the gown is a bit formal for this neighborhood," Micah said with another one of those transformative smiles. "Big night. Charity gala," Geneva said, not elaborating. "I needed to get away." Micah nodded, not pushing for more. Sometimes we all need to escape. The other customers began to leave as closing time approached. Geneva sipped her tea, feeling oddly peaceful despite being lost in an unfamiliar neighborhood with no phone and a ruined dress. "Do you need to call someone?" Micah asked as he wiped down the counter. "Let them know you're okay?" Geneva hesitated. The thought of calling her father or Bradford made her stomach clench. "I don't have my phone," she admitted. "You can use mine," Micah offered, pulling an older model smartphone from his pocket. Geneva shook her head. "Not yet. I'm not ready to go back." Micah studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Well, I can't let you wander around in the rain. The cafe closes at 10, but I live upstairs. You could dry off, and I could call you a cab when you're ready." Under normal circumstances, Geneva would never consider going to a stranger's apartment. But something about Micah made her feel safe. Maybe it was the way he didn't stare at her expensive dress or ask probing questions. Or maybe it was just that he saw her as a person, not an Ashford. "That's very kind," she said. Micah's apartment above the cafe was small but tidy. Books filled shelves along one wall, and a guitar rested in the corner. It wasn't fancy, but it felt more like a home than her penthouse ever had. "Bathrooms through there," Micah said, pointing. "I'll find you something dry to wear." Geneva emerged from the bathroom a while later wearing a plain gray sweatshirt with King's Corner printed on it and a pair of sweatpants rolled up at the ankles. Her makeup was washed off, her hair hanging damp around her shoulders. Micah had made more tea and was sitting on the couch, flipping through a car magazine. He looked up when she entered and did a double take, as if seeing her for the first time. "Better?" he asked. Geneva nodded, feeling strangely shy without her usual armor of designer clothes and perfect makeup. "Thank you. Most people wouldn't help a stranger like this." Micah shrugged. "My grandmother raised me to believe that how we treat people when they're down says more about us than how we act when things are good." "She sounds wise," Geneva said, sitting on the other end of the couch and accepting another mug of tea. "She was," Micah said, a hint of sadness in his voice. They talked for hours. Geneva found herself telling him things she'd never told anyone. How lonely it was growing up in the Ashford mansion. How her father had mapped out her entire life before she was even born. How she sometimes felt like a doll in a display case. Micah listened without judgment. In turn, he told her about growing up in this neighborhood, losing his parents young, being raised by his grandmother. How he'd been a promising musician until his little sister got into trouble and was put into the system. How he'd given up music to work steady jobs so he could get her back, but by then it was too late. She'd run away at 17, and he hadn't seen her in 5 years. "That's why I opened the cafe," he explained. "It's a safe place for people in the neighborhood. No questions asked. Just a place to be when you need somewhere to go." "Like me tonight," Geneva said softly. Micah nodded. "Like you tonight." By the time the sky began to lighten outside, Geneva knew she had to go back. Micah called her a cab, and she gave the driver her address. Before she left, she turned to Micah. "Thank you," she said, meaning it more than she'd ever meant those words before. "Anytime," Micah replied. The cafe's open every day except Monday. It was an invitation, and they both knew it. 3 days later, Geneva returned to King's Corner. She'd told her assistant she was going shopping, evading her security detail by slipping out through a service entrance at Bergdorf Goodman. She dressed simply, jeans and a cashmere sweater, her hair in a ponytail. She almost turned back twice, telling herself this was crazy. She was engaged to Bradford. She was in Ashford. She had responsibilities. But something pulled her forward, something that felt like the first real choice she'd made in years. The bell tinkled as she pushed open the cafe door. Micah was behind the counter, helping a customer. He looked up, and the surprise and pleasure that crossed his face made her heart do something strange in her chest. "You came back," he said when the customer had gone. Geneva smiled, feeling suddenly shy. "I brought your clothes back," she said, placing a small shopping bag on the counter. "Thank you for lending them to me." Micah nodded. "How about some tea? Or are you a coffee person when you're not running away from galas?" "Coffee would be wonderful," Geneva said, settling at a small table by the window. She came back the next day, and the next. Sometimes they just talked while Micah worked. Other times, when the cafe was quiet or after closing, they'd sit for hours, talking about everything and nothing. Geneva found herself laughing more than she had in years. Micah challenged her views on the world, made her see things from perspectives she'd never considered. And when he finally told her one night that he knew exactly who she was, had known from the first moment, it didn't change anything. "Why didn't you say something?" she asked. Micah shrugged. "You seemed like you needed a break from being Geneva Ashford. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." 2 weeks after that rain-soaked night, Geneva realized with startling clarity that she was falling in love with Micah King, and that her carefully planned life was about to get very, very complicated. What she didn't know was that someone had been watching. Someone had seen the Ashford heiress entering the small cafe in a neighborhood her family would never set foot in, and that someone had already made a phone call that would change everything. The storm was coming, and neither Geneva nor Micah was prepared for how hard it would hit. Victoria Ashford stood at the window of her Park Avenue penthouse, her thin frame rigid with anger. The silver-framed photograph she held showed her daughter Geneva entering a small cafe in a neighborhood the Ashfords had spent generations avoiding. "Where did you get these?" she demanded, not turning around. Maxwell Ashford, Geneva's father, sat behind his mahogany desk, fingers steepled. At 60, he still cut an imposing figure, tall, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that matched his daughter's. Bradford had her followed, Maxwell said. He became suspicious when she kept disappearing for hours at a time, said she wasn't herself. Victoria slammed the photo down, and instead of coming to us immediately, he hired a private investigator? What if the press had gotten hold of this first? Bradford knows how to be discreet, Maxwell said. Unlike our daughter, apparently. Victoria finally turned around. Who is he? This man she's seeing. Maxwell opened a folder on his desk. Micah King, 30 years old, owns a small cafe in Brooklyn. Former musician. No criminal record, but his sister was in and out of juvenile detention. Parents deceased. Raised by his grandmother, also deceased. No college education. No substantial assets beyond the cafe property, which is mortgaged. A nobody, Victoria said dismissively. A nobody who could ruin everything we've built, Maxwell countered. The merger with the Wells family through Bradford depends on this wedding. Not to mention what the board would think if the Ashford heiress was seen slumming it in Brooklyn with some cafe owner. Victoria sat down heavily in a leather chair. What do we do? Maxwell picked up his phone. We put an end to it. Now, Geneva hummed to herself as she touched up her makeup in her bathroom mirror. For the first time in years, maybe ever, she felt genuinely happy. She told her family she had a migraine to get out of yet another charity luncheon. Instead, she planned to spend the afternoon at King's Corner. She and Micah had fallen into an easy routine. She would visit the cafe several times a week, sometimes helping out during busy periods. In the evenings, they'd walk around the neighborhood or sit in his apartment talking for hours. Last night, he'd finally kissed her, and it had felt like coming home. The sharp ring of her doorbell interrupted her thoughts. Geneva frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her housekeeper had the day off. When she opened the door, her blood ran cold. Her father stood there, flanked by two men she recognized as part of the Ashford security team. Behind them was Bradford, his face a mask of concern that didn't reach his eyes. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Geneva asked, backing up a step. Maxwell Ashford strode into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. "I think you know exactly why I'm here, Geneva." Bradford followed, placing a hand on her shoulder that felt like a weight. "We're worried about you, darling." Geneva shrugged off his hand. "I'm fine. There's nothing to worry about." Maxwell tossed a manila envelope onto her glass coffee table. It landed with a slap. "Then perhaps you can explain these." With a sense of dread, Geneva opened the envelope. Inside were dozens of photographs. Her entering King's Corner, sitting at a table with Micah, the two of them walking side by side, her laughing at something he said. "You had me followed?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was for your own protection," Bradford said smoothly. "You've been acting strangely, distant, missing events. We were concerned. Concerned about me. Or concerned about how it would look?" Geneva demanded, anger rising. "Both," her father said bluntly. "You are an Ashford. Your actions reflect on this family and our company. Sneaking around with some coffee shop owner in a neighborhood where you could have been mugged, or worse, what were you thinking?" "I was thinking that for once in my life, I wanted to be with someone who sees me as a person, not a possession or a business asset." Geneva shot back. Bradford's mask of concern slipped, revealing the anger underneath. "Is that what you think of our relationship? After everything I've done for you, done for me, or done for my family's company?" Geneva challenged. Maxwell cut in, his voice cold. "That's enough. This ends now, Geneva. No more visits to Brooklyn. No more seeing this. Micah person, you can't control who I see," Geneva said, though her voice wavered. She'd never directly defied her father before. "Actually, I can," Maxwell said. "As of this morning, your trust fund is frozen. Your credit cards will only work for approved vendors. Your driver reports directly to me, and your security detail has been doubled." Geneva felt the walls closing in. "You can't be serious." "Deadly serious," her father replied. "Until you come to your senses, you are, for all intents and purposes, grounded." "I'm 25 years old," Geneva protested. "Then start acting like it," Maxwell snapped. "This childish rebellion ends now." Bradford stepped forward, his voice softening. "Geneva, we're only doing this because we care about you. This man, what do you even know about him? He could be using you for your money, your connections." "Micah isn't like that," Geneva insisted. They never are until they are, Bradford said. Remember when that waiter sold his story about you to the tabloids last year? How humiliated you were. Imagine what this Micah could do with the intimate details of your life. Geneva's cheeks burned at the memory. The waiter had seemed so nice, so genuine, until the story appeared. Ice Princess melts down over wrong salad dressing. It had been mortifying. Micah is different, she said, but doubt had crept in. For your sake, I hope so, Maxwell said, because right now, his little cafe is in violation of at least a dozen health codes. One call from me, and the health department shuts him down. Another call, and his mortgage gets called in early. Do you want to be responsible for ruining his life? Geneva's eyes widened. You wouldn't. To protect this family? This company? In a heartbeat, Maxwell confirmed. The choice is yours, Geneva. End this foolishness now, or watch your cafe owner friend lose everything he's worked for. With that, Maxwell nodded to the security men and strode out. Bradford lingered, reaching for Geneva's hand. I know you're upset now, he said, but you'll see this is for the best. I've already spoken to the wedding planner about moving up the date. A Christmas wedding would be lovely, don't you think? Get you back on track. Geneva pulled her hand away. Get out. Once they were gone, she collapsed onto her sofa, the photographs scattered around her. She picked one up, a candid shot of her and Micah sitting on a bench in the small park near his cafe. She was laughing, truly laughing, her head thrown back. Micah was looking at her with such warmth in his eyes. How could something that felt so right be destroyed so quickly? Her phone buzzed with a text. It was Micah. Missed you today. Everything okay? With shaking hands, she texted back. Need to talk. Coming over tonight. She had to warn him about her father's threats. Together, they could figure something out. They had to. Micah wiped down the counter of King's Corner, glancing at the clock for the third time in 10 minutes. Geneva had said she'd be there by 7, but it was nearly 8 now. It wasn't like her to be late without calling. He'd been looking forward to seeing her all day. Last night's kiss had changed everything between them. He knew it was complicated. She was engaged. She came from a world he could barely imagine. But when they were together, none of that seemed to matter. The bell above the door jingled, and Micah looked up with a smile that quickly faded. Instead of Geneva, 2 men in suits entered. One held up a badge. Health Department. Surprise inspection. Micah frowned. I just had my yearly inspection last month. Passed with flying colors. The inspector shrugged. New policy. Random follow-ups. For the next hour, the men went through his cafe with a fine-tooth comb, finding violations Micah was certain hadn't existed during his last inspection. Cracked tiles he'd never noticed. A refrigerator running 2 degrees too warm. Evidence of pest activity in corners Micah kept meticulously clean. By the time they left, he had a list of violations that would cost thousands to fix and a notice that he was shut down until they were addressed. As he flipped the sign to closed with a heavy heart, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. Micah King, a woman's voice asked when he answered. Yes, who's this? This is Margaret Chun from First National Bank. I'm calling about your business loan for King's Corner. Micah's stomach dropped. What about it? There's been a change in terms. The bank is calling in the balance in full, effective immediately. Micah nearly dropped the phone. What? That's impossible. I've never missed a payment. It's all in the fine print, Mr. King. The bank reserves the right to demand full payment under certain circumstances. What circumstances? Micah demanded. I'm not at liberty to discuss that. You'll receive official notification by mail. You have 30 days to comply. The call ended, leaving Micah staring at his phone in disbelief. First the health inspection, now this? It couldn't be a coincidence. His phone buzzed with a text from Geneva. I'm so sorry. Can't make it tonight. Something came up. No explanation. No suggestion of rescheduling. Just a cancellation that felt horribly final. That's when Micah knew. This had to be the work of the Ashfords. Geneva sat in her bedroom, clutching her phone. Her father's words echoed in her head. End this, or watch your cafe owner friend lose everything. She planned to go to Micah to warn him. But then Bradford had shown up at her door with her mother, insisting they all go to dinner to talk things through. Her security detail made it clear she had no choice. At dinner, her mother had passed an envelope across the table. "From your father," Victoria said. Inside was a single photograph. Micah, standing outside his cafe with a closed by Department of Health sign clearly visible in the window. "Just a taste of what will happen if you continue this, whatever it is," Victoria had said. "Your father is a man of his word, Geneva. Don't test him." Now, alone in her room, Geneva typed and deleted message after message to Micah. How could she explain? How could she tell him that her family was destroying his business because of her? In the end, she settled for the coward's way out. A simple cancellation, no explanation. It was better this way, she told herself. Better to cut ties cleanly than watch her father systematically dismantle everything Micah had worked for. Her phone buzzed with his reply. "Is everything okay? What's going on, Geneva?" She turned off her phone without answering. It was for the best. It had to be. For a week, Geneva went through the motions. She attended events on Bradford's arm, smiling when appropriate, saying all the right things. She nodded when her mother talked about wedding plans. She sat silently in meetings at Ashford International, where her father was grooming her to eventually take over. Inside, she felt hollow. She turned her phone back on after 2 days to find dozens of messages from Micah. Concerned at first, then confused, finally hurt and angry. The last one simply said, "I guess your family got to you. I thought you were different." That one broke her heart all over again. Bradford seemed to sense her unhappiness, but misinterpreted the cause. "You're just stressed about the wedding," he said one night as they left a restaurant, cameras flashing around them. "Once we're married, things will settle down." Geneva looked at him, really looked at him, and wondered how she'd ever agreed to marry someone so self-absorbed. Someone who saw her as an accessory to his ambition, not a partner. "There's not going to be a wedding, Bradford," she said quietly. Bradford's smile didn't falter for the cameras, but his eyes hardened. "Don't be ridiculous. Of course there will be. I don't love you," Geneva stated simply. "Love has nothing to do with it," Bradford replied, steering her toward their waiting car with a firm hand on her back. "This is about family, legacy, business. Love is for people who can't afford better motivations." In that moment, Geneva knew she couldn't do it. Couldn't marry Bradford. Couldn't be the daughter her parents wanted. Couldn't keep living this empty life where appearances mattered more than feelings. She needed to see Micah. To explain. To apologize. Even if he hated her now, he deserved the truth. But when she finally managed to slip away from her security detail, claiming a spa appointment and sneaking out the back door, she found King's Corner boarded up. A "for sale" sign hung in the window. Micah was gone. "You did the right thing," Maxwell Ashford told his daughter a month later. They were in his office at Ashford International. The Manhattan skyline spread out behind him like a kingdom. The boy took the settlement and signed the NDA. "He won't be bothering you again." Geneva's head snapped up. "Settlement? NDA? What are you talking about?" Maxwell waved a dismissive hand. "After we took care of the health code violations and the loan issue, I had our lawyers approach him with an offer. A generous one, considering. Money to relocate, start fresh somewhere else, in exchange for his silence about your association." "You paid him off?" Geneva whispered, feeling sick. "I protected you," her father corrected. "And he took the money quite eagerly, I might add. So much for true love." Geneva didn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. Micah wouldn't take hush money. He had too much integrity. Unless he'd been so hurt by her abandonment, so damaged by her family's attacks on his business, that he'd given up on her. The thought was unbearable. "Now," Maxwell continued, "Bradford tells me you've been resistant to finalizing the wedding plans. That ends today. The announcement goes out tomorrow. June wedding at the plaza. Non-negotiable." Geneva stood up. "No." Maxwell blinked and used a direct defiance. "Excuse me. I said no," Geneva repeated, her voice stronger. "I'm not marrying Bradford. I'm not being your puppet anymore." Maxwell's face darkened. "Sit down, Geneva. You're being hysterical." "I'm being honest," Geneva shot back. "For the first time in my life, I don't want a life you've planned for me. I don't want Bradford. I don't want to run Ashford International." "Then what do you want?" Maxwell demanded. Geneva took a deep breath. I want to find Micah. I want to tell him I'm sorry. I want a chance to make my own choices, my own mistakes. Maxwell laughed, a cold sound without humor. That's not going to happen. You are in Ashford. You have responsibilities. Obligation. Not anymore, Geneva said, turning to leave. Walk out that door, and you're cut off, Maxwell threatened. No money, no trust fund, no shares in the company. Nothing. Geneva paused at the door, then looked back at her father. Do you really think it's still a threat, Dad? After everything you've done? After you showed me that money just makes it easier to hurt people? She walked out, ignoring her father's angry shouts behind her. For the first time in her life, Geneva Ashford was making her own choice. Now, she just had to find Micah and hope it wasn't too late to make things right. What she didn't know was that finding him would be the easy part. Convincing him to trust her again after everything that had happened. That would be the real challenge. And her family wasn't done fighting to pull her back into the world she was trying to escape. The small studio apartment Geneva rented in Chelsea was nothing like her luxurious penthouse. One room, a tiny kitchen, a bathroom where you could barely turn around. But it was hers, paid for with the money from selling her designer handbags and jewelry before her father could freeze all her accounts. It had been 2 weeks since she'd walked out of her father's office. 2 weeks of ignoring frantic calls from her mother, threatening messages from Bradford, and stern emails from the Ashford family lawyer. 2 weeks of searching for Micah. He wasn't answering the phone number she had for him. His cafe remained boarded up. None of the neighboring businesses would tell her anything. They just looked at her expensive clothes and perfect hair and closed up like clams. She'd even tried social media, but Micah had never been much for online presence. His profile hadn't been updated in months. Geneva sat on her second-hand sofa, a cup of instant coffee cooling beside her. On the coffee table was a newspaper, folded open to a small article about Bradford Wells announcing his engagement to Olivia Pierce, daughter of a Texas oil magnate. The news had broken just 3 days after Geneva walked away. So much for true love, she thought bitterly. Her phone rang, her new phone, with a new number that her family didn't have. The caller ID showed unknown. Hello, she answered cautiously. Is this Geneva Ashford? An unfamiliar female voice asked. Who's asking? Geneva countered. My name is Tasha. Tasha King. Micah's sister. Geneva nearly dropped the phone. Micah's sister? He said he hadn't seen you in years. He hasn't, Tasha confirmed. But I keep tabs on him. Hard habit to break. And lately, I've been hearing some interesting things about my brother and a certain heiress. How did you get this number? Geneva asked. I have my ways, Tasha said cryptically. The question is, why are you looking for my brother? Haven't your people done enough damage? Geneva closed her eyes. I need to explain what happened. To apologize. Apologize? Tasha's laugh was harsh. Your family destroyed his business, threatened him with legal action, and then paid him off like he was a problem to be solved. What exactly would apologizing fix? He took the money. Geneva asked, her heart sinking. He didn't have a choice, Tasha said. They made it clear they'd keep coming after him if he didn't. But he didn't sign their precious NDA. Told them where to shove it. Actually, that's my brother. Hope flared in Geneva's chest. Please, I need to find him. I left my family, my fiancé, everything. I want to make things right. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. You really walked away from all that money? All that privilege? Yes, Geneva said simply. Another pause, then. He's in Red Hook, fixing up an old garage, trying to turn it into a music space for kids in the neighborhood. I'll text you the address. But I swear if you hurt him again, I won't, Geneva promised. Thank you, Tasha. After the call ended, Geneva stared at the address that appeared on her phone. Red Hook wasn't far. She could be there in 30 minutes. But what would she say? How could she explain? Would he even listen? There was only one way to find out. The building in Red Hook was old but solid, a former auto repair shop with big garage doors and high ceilings. As Geneva approached, she heard music coming from inside, a guitar playing something low and bluesy. Her hand shook as she knocked on the side door. The music stopped abruptly. After a moment, the door swung open, and there was Micah. He looked different, thinner, with shadows under his eyes and a weariness that hadn't been there before. His expression went from curious to shocked to carefully blank in the space of seconds. "Geneva," he said, his deep voice giving away nothing. "Hi," she replied, suddenly feeling foolish. What had she expected? That he'd welcome her with open arms after everything that had happened? "How did you find me?" he asked. "Your sister called me." Micah's eyebrows rose. "Tasha? You talked to Tasha?" Geneva nodded. "She said you're turning this place into a music space for kids." Micah glanced behind him into the garage. "Trying to. Not sure it'll work out." An awkward silence fell between them. Finally, Geneva couldn't take it anymore. "Micah, I'm so sorry," she blurted out. "What my family did to you, what I did to you, it was unforgivable. I just need you to know that I never wanted any of it to happen. I thought I was protecting you by staying away." Micah's expression softened slightly. "You want to come in? Seems like we have a lot to talk about." Inside, the garage was half finished. A small stage stood at one end, and music equipment was scattered around. Chairs and benches lined the walls, and colorful rugs covered parts of the concrete floor. "It's not much yet," Micah said, watching her take it all in. "But I figured the kids around here could use a place to learn music that doesn't cost what those fancy Manhattan schools charge." "It's wonderful," Geneva said sincerely. Micah gestured to a bench, and they both sat, a careful distance between them. "Your sister said you didn't sign the NDA," Geneva began. Micah snorted. "No, your father's lawyers weren't happy about that. But I figured I'd already lost everything else. My cafe, my apartment above it, my neighborhood. Wasn't going to sell my right to talk about what happened too." "I'm so sorry," Geneva repeated. "I should have fought harder. I should have warned you. I was a coward." Micah was quiet for a moment, looking at her intently. "Why are you here, Geneva?" "Really? Because I left them," she said. "My family, Bradford, all of it. I walked away." Micah's eyes widened slightly. "When?" 2 weeks ago. I've been looking for you ever since." She gestured to her simple jeans and sweater. "I'm not the Ashford heiress anymore. Just Geneva." "What?" Micah asked, his voice softer. Geneva met his eyes. "Because they made me choose between being in Ashford and being happy. And for the first time in my life, I chose happiness." Micah's expression remained guarded. "And you think happiness is with me? After everything that happened?" "I think happiness is being true to myself," Geneva clarified. "And yes, I hope there's still a chance for us. But even if there isn't, I couldn't keep living that life. It was killing me slowly." Micah sighed, running a hand over his close-cropped hair. "I want to believe you, Geneva. But your world and mine, they don't mix. Your family made that crystal clear." "They're not my world anymore," Geneva insisted. "I have a tiny apartment in Chelsea. I'm looking for a job. I'm starting over." "Starting over is hard," Micah warned. "Especially when you're used to having everything." "I never had what mattered," Geneva said quietly. "Freedom. Truth. Someone who sees the real me." Something flickered in Micah's eyes. A softening. A spark of the connection they'd shared before. "I missed you," he admitted, his voice rough. Geneva's heart leapt. "I missed you too. Every day." Micah reached out, his hand hovering near hers on the bench between them. "I'm still angry about what happened. It's going to take time." "I understand," Geneva said, turning her palm up in invitation. Slowly, Micah placed his hand in hers. The simple touch felt like coming home. "I can't promise anything," he said, "but maybe we can try again. Take it slow. See what happens when there's no secrets between us." Geneva smiled, feeling truly hopeful for the first time in weeks. "I'd like that." They spent the afternoon together, talking honestly about everything that had happened. Micah showed her his plans for the music space, his eyes lighting up as he described the programs he wanted to offer local kids. Geneva told him about her job search, her tiny apartment, the reality of living on a budget for the first time in her life. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the garage windows, Micah offered to walk her home. "It's a long way to Chelsea," Geneva said. "I can take the subway." Micah smiled. "I know how the subway works, Geneva. I can show you." She laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Okay, subway expert. Lead the way." They were almost to the station when a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up beside them. Geneva felt a chill run down her spine as the back window rolled down to reveal her father's stern face. "Geneva," Maxwell Ashford said, his voice cold. "Get in the car. We need to talk." Geneva moved closer to Micah. "No, I have nothing to say to you." Maxwell's eyes flickered to Micah, then back to his daughter. "Don't make a scene. Not here, not now. You're the one pulling up in a scary black SUV, like some movie villain," Geneva pointed out. "If anyone's making a scene, it's you." Maxwell's jaw tightened. "Fina, have it your way." He looked at Micah. "Mr. King, I see you've reunited with my daughter despite our agreement." "There was no agreement," Micah said calmly. "I took your money because I had no choice. But I never promised to stay away from Geneva. I warned you what would happen," Maxwell said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Dad, stop it," Geneva interrupted. "Your threats don't work anymore. You can't hurt me, and you've already done your worst to Micah." "Not quite," Maxwell replied. "Mr. King, did you know that your sister Tasha has been living in Seattle for the past year, working at a women's shelter, trying to turn her life around?" Micah went very still. "What about her?" "She's doing well," Maxwell continued casually. "It would be a shame if her past troubles resurfaced. If her juvenile record somehow found its way to her employers. If certain charges that were dismissed years ago suddenly came back to haunt her." "You stay away from my sister," Micah growled, taking a step toward the car. Geneva put a hand on his arm. "He's bluffing. He can't do that." "Can't I?" Maxwell smiled thinly. "You of all people should know what Ashford money and influence can accomplish, Geneva." Geneva felt sick. This was low, even for her father. "What do you want?" "The same thing I've always wanted. For you to come to your senses. Return home. Fulfill your obligations to this family. And if I don't," Geneva challenged, "then Mr. King's sister will face the consequences of your selfishness." Maxwell said simply, "Your choice, as always." With that, the window rolled up, and the SUV pulled away from the curb, leaving Geneva and Micah staring after it in stunned silence. "He wouldn't really go after Tasha, would he?" Micah asked, his voice tight with anger and fear. Geneva wanted to reassure him, but she knew her father too well. "He might. He sees this as a war now, and he'll use any weapon he has." Micah kicked a nearby trash can, the clang echoing in the quiet street. "Damn it, I just found out where Tasha is. She's finally getting her life together." "I'm so sorry," Geneva whispered, feeling the weight of her family's toxicity more than ever. "This is all my fault." Micah turned to her, his eyes fierce. "No, this is your father's fault, not yours." They stood in silence for a moment, both trying to process what had just happened. "What are we going to do?" Geneva finally asked. Micah's expression hardened. "I need to warn Tasha. Get her somewhere safe. And then..." Micah looked at her, determination replacing the anger in his eyes. "And then we fight back. I'm tired of running. Tired of rich people thinking they can play with our lives like we're pieces on a chessboard." Geneva felt a surge of love for this man who refused to be broken by her father's threats. "We'll fight together," she promised. "But how?" Micah thought for a moment. "Your father cares about one thing more than anything else, the Ashford image. What would happen if that image got a serious dent?" "What do you mean?" Geneva asked. "I mean," Micah said slowly, "what if the Ashford heiress told her story? The real story, not the sanitized version your family PR team puts out." Geneva's eyes widened. "You wanted to go public? About everything?" Micah nodded. "Your father threatened my sister because he thinks he's untouchable. Let's show him he's not." The idea was terrifying and exhilarating. Her whole life, Geneva had been taught to protect the family image at all costs, to speak in careful sound bites, to never, ever air the Ashford dirty laundry in public. "It would cause a scandal," she said. "That's the point," Micah replied. "Your father can threaten us individually, but he can't silence the whole world once the story is out there." Geneva took a deep breath. "Okay, but we need to be smart about this. My father has most of the New York media in his pocket. If we're going to do this, we need to make sure the story can't be buried or spun." Micah smiled grimly. "I might know someone who can help with that." 2 days later, Geneva sat in the green room of the Wake Up America morning show, her hands shaking slightly. After Micah called in a favor from a musician friend who knew one of the producers, they'd secured her a spot on the live broadcast, a 5-minute interview that was supposed to be about her charity work. Her father's lawyers had already called twice, threatening legal action if she spoke about family matters on air. The show's producers had been nervous but stood firm. Live television was live television. Micah squeezed her hand. "You sure about this?" Geneva nodded. "I've been letting other people control my story my whole life. It's time to tell the truth." A production assistant poked her head in. "2 minutes, Ms. Ashford." As Geneva stood and smoothed her simple blue dress. Not a designer label for once. Micah pulled her into a tight hug. "Whatever happens, we face it together," he murmured against her hair. "Together," she agreed. The lights of the studio were blinding as Geneva took her seat across from host Melissa Chun, whose smile was professional but whose eyes were curious. They'd met at charity events before, but never like this. Today we're joined by Geneva Ashford, heiress to the Ashford International Empire and a fixture in New York society. Melissa began as the cameras rolled. "Geneva, thanks for being here." "Thank you for having me," Geneva replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "You've been in the news recently," Melissa continued. "There are rumors that you've stepped back from your family business and charity obligations. Can you tell us what's been going on?" Geneva took a deep breath. This was it. No turning back. "Actually, Melissa, I haven't just stepped back. I've walked away entirely." The words felt both terrifying and freeing to say out loud on national television. Melissa's professional mask slipped a bit, genuine surprise showing through. "That's quite a statement. Can you elaborate?" "I'd be happy to," Geneva said, looking directly into the camera. "For 25 years, I've been the Ashford heiress, the ice princess of Manhattan, as some newspapers like to call me. I've smiled for the right photos, attended the right parties, dated the right men, all while feeling completely empty inside. In the control room, phones were already ringing. The Ashford PR team working overtime to shut this down. But it was too late. 2 months ago, I got lost in Brooklyn after leaving a charity event. I ended up at a small cafe owned by a man named Micah King. And for the first time in my life, someone saw me. Not the Ashford name or the trust fund or the social connections. Just me." Melissa leaned forward, clearly sensing this was going to be bigger than the fluff piece they'd planned. "And what happened then?" "We fell in love," Geneva said simply. "And when my family found out, they did everything in their power to destroy him. They shut down his business, called in his loans, threatened his sister. These are serious allegations," Melissa said carefully. "They're the truth," Geneva replied. "My father, Maxwell Ashford, believes that money can solve any problem, including a daughter who dares to fall in love with someone he doesn't approve of, someone who doesn't come from wealth or the right social circles." She took another deep breath. "Last week, my father threatened to ruin the life of Micah's sister if I didn't return to the fold. That's when I knew I had to speak out. This pattern of control and manipulation has to stop." Melissa looked slightly shell-shocked. This was not the society gossip she'd been expecting. "What do you hope will happen as a result of you sharing this today?" Geneva smiled softly. "I hope people will see that the Ashford name isn't as pristine as our PR team would have you believe. I hope my father will realize that threatening innocent people isn't the way to show love. And mostly, I hope other people trapped in gilded cages will find the courage to break free." Off camera, producers were frantically signaling to wrap it up, phone still ringing off the hook. "And what about you, and Micah, was it?" Melissa asked. "What's next for you two?" Geneva's smile widened. "I don't know. And that's the most wonderful part. For the first time in my life, my future isn't mapped out in 5-year plans and strategic moves. I'm just living, one day at a time, with someone who loves the real me." As the segment ended and Geneva was quickly ushered off set, her phone exploded with notifications. Her mother's name appeared on the screen, then her father's, then Bradford's. She declined them all. Micah was waiting in the hallway, his face split in a wide grin. "You did it," he said, pulling her into his arms. "You were amazing." "We did it," Geneva corrected, feeling lighter than she had in years. Together, Micah agreed, kissing her softly. They'd won the first battle. But the war was far from over. Her father wouldn't take this public humiliation lying down. There would be pushback, consequences, maybe even legal action. But for the first time, Geneva wasn't afraid. With Micah by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. What she didn't know was that her father was already plotting his revenge, and it would test their newfound strength in ways they couldn't imagine. The morning after Geneva's television appearance, the Ashford name was splashed across every newspaper and trending on every social media platform. Ashford Heiress rebels screamed one headline. Love over luxury. Geneva Ashford chooses cafe owner, declared another. In her small Chelsea apartment, Geneva sat on the couch with Micah, scrolling through the coverage on her laptop. Your father must be having a meltdown, Micah said, his arm around her shoulders. Geneva nodded. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. My mother left 7 voicemails, each one more hysterical than the last. Have you listened to any of them? Micah asked. Not yet, Geneva admitted. I'm not ready. Micah kissed the top of her head. No ruse. You've been brave enough for 1 week. A knock at the door made them both jump. Geneva approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. She relaxed when she saw who it was. It's Tasha, she told Micah, opening the door. Micah's sister stood in the hallway, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She was tall like her brother, with the same deep eyes, but her hair was styled in long braids, and she had a wariness about her that spoke of hard years. So you're the famous Geneva Ashford, Tasha said, looking Geneva up and down. You're all over the news. Come in, Geneva offered, stepping aside. Micah rose from the couch, his face a mix of emotions. Tasha, you're really here. The siblings stood awkwardly for a moment before Tasha dropped her bag and stepped forward, wrapping her arms around her brother. 5 years is too long, she murmured. Way too long, Micah agreed, his voice thick. When they separated, both wiping away tears, Tasha turned to Geneva. Your TV interview was something else. Bet your daddy wasn't expecting that. No, he wasn't, Geneva agreed. Did you get my warning? Is everything okay at the shelter? Tasha nodded. Got your message just in time. I took a leave of absence, told my boss I had a family emergency. Which is true enough. She looked around the small apartment. So this is how the other half lives now, huh? Geneva smiled ruefully. It's an adjustment, but worth it. Must be love, Tasha said, her tone softer than before. Giving up all that money for my knucklehead brother. Hey, Micah protested, but he was smiling. The moment of levity was broken by Geneva's phone buzzing on the coffee table. The screen showed an unfamiliar number. Unknown caller, Geneva said. Could be reporters. They've been trying to reach me all morning. Or it could be your father. Using a different phone to trick you into answering, Micah suggested. Geneva hesitated, then picked up the call. Hello, Ms. Ashford? This is Diane Lewis from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. Geneva's blood ran cold. Yes. We'd like you to come in for questioning regarding some serious allegations that have been made. What allegations? Geneva asked, her voice shaking. I'd rather not discuss that over the phone. Can you come to our office today at 2 p.m.? Geneva looked at Micah, who was watching her with concern. I'll be there, she said before hanging up. What is it? Micah asked. The district attorney's office wants to question me. Geneva sat down heavily on the couch. It's starting. My father's retaliation. Tasha crossed her arms. What can they possibly charge you with? Being in love with someone who isn't a trust fund baby. It could be anything, Geneva said. My father has connections everywhere. He could have fabricated evidence, claimed I embezzled from the foundation, anything to discredit me after that interview. Micah sat beside her, taking her hand. We'll get a lawyer. Fight this together. Geneva nodded, but fear had taken root in her stomach. Her father's resources were virtually unlimited. How long could they really hold out against that kind of power? The district attorney's office was cold and intimidating. Geneva sat in a sterile interview room. A young lawyer named Jamie that Micah's musician friend had recommended sitting beside her. They'd barely been able to afford the retainer, but there was no way Geneva was facing this alone. The door opened, and a serious-looking woman in her 50s entered, carrying a file folder. Ms. Ashford, I'm Assistant District Attorney Diane Lewis. Thank you for coming in. You didn't give me much choice, Geneva replied. What exactly am I being accused of? Lewis opened the folder. We've received information suggesting financial irregularities in the Ashford Foundation. Specifically, funds being diverted to personal accounts under your control. Geneva's jaw dropped. That's absurd. I never handled the foundation's finances. Yet you were a signatory on several of the accounts, Lewis countered. And we have documentation showing transfers to offshore accounts linked to you. This is fabricated, Geneva's lawyer interjected. My client demands to see this supposed evidence. Lewis slid several papers across the table, bank statements, transfer authorizations, all bearing what looked like Geneva's signature. These are forgeries, Geneva insisted, her hands shaking. I never signed these. That's for handwriting experts to determine, Lewis said coolly. In the meantime, we're considering charges of embezzlement, tax evasion, and wire fraud. Geneva felt like she couldn't breathe. This is my father's doing. He's framing me because I spoke out against him on television. Lewis's expression didn't change. That's a serious accusation against a respected businessman. Do you have any evidence to support it? Geneva looked helplessly at her lawyer, who placed a steadying hand on her arm. My client needs time to review these documents and prepare a response, Jamie said firmly, and will be filing countercomplaints regarding the suspicious timing of these allegations. Lewis gathered her papers. You have 48 hours to provide an explanation for these financial discrepancies before we proceed with formal charges. After she left, Geneva put her head in her hands. I can't believe this is happening. It's a scare tactic, Jamie assured her, but a serious one. Your father is pulling out all the stops. What do we do? Geneva asked, feeling more lost than she had that rainy night months ago. We fight back, Jamie said. But first, we need to understand exactly what we're up against. I need to know everything about the Ashford Foundation, your involvement, and anyone who might be willing to stand up to your father. Geneva thought for a moment. There's one person who might help, but reaching out to her is a big risk. Eleanor Ashford, Geneva's grandmother and Maxwell's mother, lived in a stately brownstone in the Upper East Side. At 78, she was still sharp as a tack, and the only person who had ever successfully stood up to Maxwell. She opened the door herself, her silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the late hour. I wondered when you'd come to me, she said, ushering Geneva inside. The house was exactly as Geneva remembered from childhood visits, elegant but warm, filled with books and art collected over a lifetime. I'm sorry to show up like this, Grandma, Geneva said as they settled in the living room. But I didn't know where else to turn. Eleanor's piercing blue eyes, so like Geneva's own, studied her carefully. I saw your television interview. Bold move. Too bold, apparently, Geneva said ruefully. Now Dad is trying to frame me for embezzlement. Eleanor's eyebrows shot up. Maxwell always did have a flair for the dramatic. Tell me everything. Geneva explained the situation, the fake documents, the DA's threat of charges, the impossible deadline. When she finished, Eleanor was silent for a long moment. Your father forgets where he comes from, she finally said. Who built this family? What do you mean? Geneva asked. Eleanor rose and went to a cabinet, unlocking it with a small key she kept on a chain around her neck. Your grandfather and I started Ashford International with one small hotel in Queens. We built it piece by piece with hard work and honesty. Maxwell was born into wealth. He never understood its true value. She returned with a thick folder. I've kept records of everything. Every board meeting, every major decision, including the last 5 years of foundation activities. Geneva's eyes widened. You have documentation of the foundation finances? Eleanor nodded. I may be retired, but I never stopped paying attention. And I never trusted that Bradford Wells. Too slick by half. Bradford? Geneva repeated. What does he have to do with this? He's been handling the foundation books for years, Eleanor explained. With your father's blessing, of course. If there's been any funny business with the money, those two would be behind it. Hope sparked in Geneva's chest. Grandma, would you be willing to speak to my lawyer? And possibly testify if this goes to court? Eleanor's smile was steely. Darling, I've been waiting years for a chance to remind your father who really holds the power in this family. Armed with Eleanor's documents and testimony, Geneva and her lawyer confronted the DA's office. The evidence was compelling, not only proving Geneva's innocence, but suggesting that Bradford and Maxwell had been using the foundation to hide questionable financial maneuvers for years. By the end of the week, the investigation had shifted away from Geneva entirely. Bradford was seen leaving the Ashford International headquarters carrying boxes, his face grim. Rumor had it that Maxwell had cut him loose to save himself. The oldest trick in the corporate scandal playbook. Geneva should have felt vindicated, but mostly she felt tired. The constant fight against her father's machinations was exhausting. "You know he won't stop," she told Micah as they sat in his newly rented apartment above the music space he was still renovating. "He'll find another way to come after us." Micah was quiet for a moment, his fingers absently strumming his guitar. "What if we took away his reason to fight?" "What do you mean?" Geneva asked. "Your father is fighting because he thinks there's something to win," Micah explained. "Control over you, the Ashford image, maybe even getting you back into the fold somehow. So what if we make it clear there's nothing to win? That this war he's waging is only hurting him?" Geneva considered this. "You're talking about a permanent public break. Something even more definitive than the TV interview." Micah nodded. "I'm talking about living our lives so openly, so publicly happy that any attack from him just looks petty and pathetic. Living well is the best revenge," Geneva said with a small smile. "Something like that," Micah agreed. "But first, we need to make sure you're truly free of the Ashford hold." Geneva's phone buzzed with a text from her grandmother. "Time to end this. Come to the house tomorrow at noon. Bring Micah." Maxwell Ashford was already at Eleanor's brownstone when Geneva and Micah arrived the next day. He sat stiffly on the sofa, looking like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. "Geneva," he said coldly, not acknowledging Micah at all. "Dad," she replied, equally frigid. Eleanor swept into the room, a force of nature in her silk blouse and tailored pants. "Sit down, all of you. This ends today." The authority in her voice was such that everyone complied immediately. "Maxwell," Eleanor began, "your behavior has been disgraceful. Attempting to frame your own daughter for financial crimes? Using the foundation your father and I established as a weapon? I raised you better than that." Maxwell's jaw tightened. "Mother, you don't understand the situation." "I understand perfectly." Eleanor cut him off. "You can't bear to lose control of Geneva, of the Ashford image, of anything. It's always been your greatest flaw." She turned to Geneva. "And you, my dear, while I admire your courage in breaking free, your public revelations have put the family and the business at risk. There are more diplomatic ways to handle family disputes." Geneva looked down, feeling properly chastised despite being in her 20s. "Now," Eleanor continued, "here's what's going to happen. Maxwell, you will cease all actions against Geneva and Micah immediately. No more legal threats, no more financial pressure, no more harassment of any kind." "And why would I agree to that?" Maxwell asked, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. Eleanor smiled thinly. "Because I still hold 30% of Ashford International's voting shares. And I've had some illuminating conversations with several board members about your recent creative accounting." Maxwell paled slightly. "Furthermore," Eleanor continued, "you will provide Geneva with her rightful inheritance. Not the full trust fund, but the portion from my side of the family that was always meant to be hers, independent of her role in the company." "That's not necessary," Geneva began, but Eleanor held up a hand. "It is absolutely necessary. That money is yours by right, not contingent on your obedience. It will give you the freedom to build whatever life you choose." She looked pointedly at Micah. "With whomever you choose." Eleanor turned back to Maxwell. "In exchange, Geneva will sign an agreement not to speak further about family matters in public. A dignified separation, with no more dirty laundry aired on national television." The room was silent as everyone absorbed Eleanor's terms. "And if I refuse?" Maxwell finally asked. "Then I call an emergency board meeting," Eleanor said simply. "With what I know about the foundation's finances, you wouldn't survive the vote of confidence." Maxwell looked at his daughter, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. You'd really choose him over your family? Your legacy? Geneva took Micah's hand. I'm not choosing him over family, Dad. I'm choosing happiness over control. Love over legacy. Why can't you understand that? Because he's afraid, Eleanor said softly. Afraid that if he loosens his grip, even a little, everything will fall apart. It's why he's always been so hard on you, Geneva. Fear, not lack of love. Something flickered in Maxwell's eyes. Vulnerability, perhaps, or recognition. For a brief moment, Geneva saw the father who had once carried her on his shoulders before the weight of the Ashford empire had hardened him. Fine, Maxwell said at last. I'll have the lawyers draw up the papers. The inheritance, in exchange for discretion. And no more interference in our lives, Geneva added firmly. No threats, no private investigators, no pressure on Micah's business or his sister. Maxwell's jaw worked for a moment before he nodded curtly. Agreed. Eleanor beamed. Excellent. Now, I believe this calls for tea. Or perhaps something stronger. 6 months later, King's Corner Music Center opened its doors in Red Hook. The former garage had been transformed into a vibrant space where neighborhood kids could learn instruments, record songs, and perform for their community. Geneva stood beside Micah as he cut the ribbon, her grandmother beaming proudly nearby. The modest inheritance she'd received had been enough to help finish the renovations and establish a scholarship fund for children who couldn't afford lessons. Geneva's relationship with her father remained strained, but the open warfare had ended. They saw each other occasionally at Eleanor's Sunday dinners, maintaining a polite distance. Victoria had surprised everyone by divorcing Maxwell after the financial scandals came to light, moving to their house in the Hamptons and starting a new life of her own. As for Bradford, he'd quickly rebounded with his Texas oil heiress, though rumors persisted about a prenuptial agreement with unprecedented restrictions. Ready for this? Micah asked, as they prepared to welcome the first group of students. Geneva smiled, looking around at the colorful space filled with instruments, at Tasha helping set up the sound equipment, at the neighborhood families already gathering outside. More than ready, she replied. This feels like where I was always meant to be. Micah pulled her close. Remember the night we met? When you showed up at my old cafe, lost and soaking wet. Geneva laughed. How could I forget? My Louboutins were ruined. I knew that night that you were special, Micah said, his voice soft. Not because you were in Ashford, but because even when you were at your lowest point, there was something in your eyes. A spark that said you weren't broken, just a little lost. And you found me, Geneva said, touching his face gently. We found each other, Micah corrected, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. And I don't ever want to lose you again. Geneva's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring. Nothing like the ostentatious diamond Bradford had given her, but infinitely more precious. Geneva Ashford, will you marry me? Not for empire building or society connections or merging families, but just because I love you and want to spend my life with you. Tears filled Geneva's eyes as she nodded. Yes, 1,000 times yes. As Micah slipped the ring onto her finger, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text message from her father. Your trust fund is frozen. This is your last chance to come back. Geneva looked at the message, then at the man before her, at the life they were building together. She pressed delete and walked into Micah's arms. This time, there was no fade to black. This was just the beginning of their story. The end.